Great. Any other questions?
Just, I'm with you on the 90.
Yeah, we'll talk about it next meeting and figure that out, whether that's the right number or not. And we can certainly do our homework before then and talk to Joe Smith and maybe even a builder or two that we might know. There's not that many buildings that are being knocked over fully and demolished.
When we were doing our homework on this, Joe indicated that there are about 12 a year, and not all of those would qualify.
Sure.
Would qualify.
Sure.
So we're not talking about a whole lot.
Yeah.
All right. I would request, if you're going to change that, given the fact that I'm thinking mostly about winter and snowstorms, I wouldn't go lower than 60.
Okay.
Okay, just because
That's
we really
fair.
would want to
Yeah.
have a meeting.
That's good feedback. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any other
And, well, just
comments?
think, in paragraph 4, it does indicate that the commission may waive the balance of the waiting period or may determine that the waiting period must remain in effect. So I think whether it's 90 days, they do have the option. That does indicate the ability for them to reduce it. And like she said, in winter, 90 days could easily come upon you by, in something in December, January, you have to postpone it, now you're into February, so you could easily be beyond 30 or 60 days. So.
Yeah, we'll work that out. Thank you. We'll move on. We don't need a motion to go to a, is there a motion?
We do have one for both the possible change of the Smith-Harris house and,
Well, no, but for the demolition?
yeah, both. It's one call to a public hearing. Both will be at the same public hearing.
Okay. So the next on our agenda then is 2C, discussion and I guess possible action of Smith-Harris House name change. And who's Jody's here tonight. Jody, introduce yourself because I'm not sure if everyone remembers who you are.
I was going to thank you all for the opportunity to allow me to offer this brief presentation tonight and also to introduce myself. My name is Joni DiMartino. I'm the director of the Smith-Harris House. I work part-time for the Commission and Friends about 16 hours a week. And I want to start out by saying right up front that what we are asking for today requires no money on the part of the town further than our regular established budget. The Smith-Harris House Commission and the Friends Board of Directors has, with the town's prior approval in 2015, completed a 2-year initiative of professional development program called STEPS Connecticut, or Standards and Excellence in History Programs, managed by the Connecticut League of History Organizations and Connecticut Humanities. Through STEPS, we were able to obtain a grant to create our very first strategic plan and hired museum consultant Kathy Crowell-Varda to oversee and lead us through the process. We met jointly over a period of 5 months, which included visits to and participation by the East Lyme Historical Society, the Historic Properties Commission, and Friends of the Samuel Smith House for intensive discussions on potential new directions for the Smith-Harris House and site. One challenge that came to the forefront repeatedly is the site name. Our current name, the Smith-Harris House, does not fully embrace who we are, the history of the site, or who we want to be to our community in the future. The name is ill-fitting. It recognizes the final residence of the house, yet the house is decorated for the time period of the original residence, and that's a century spans difference there. There's also considerable confusion between our site, the Samuel Smith House, and even Smith Acres, and we have noticed this with visitors, users of social media, and even our professional peers. So we have seen this very recently too. And names are important. I spent today just outside of Hartford as the State Historic Preservation Office annual conference, where one of the featured speakers stated that, quote, "A name is a story. Places have names for a reason, and without those stories, something is lost," unquote. And I found that sentiment that I heard her say today speaking to exactly why I'm here before you tonight. After intensive internal discussion with both the Commission and the Friends Board, as well as input from 2 peer consultants, our colleagues at Connecticut Humanities and the First Selectmen, we are formally, respectfully requesting permission to officially change our name to Brookside Farm Museum, with the tagline, "Cultivating the Story, Avery, Smith, and Harris, 1845 to 1955. This new rebranding, which will later include a new refreshed logo and changing exhibits in the museum, allow us to better tell our story, to share the full history of the site from the building of the house in 1845 through wars, depression, changes in industry, agriculture, and social movements to 1955. The site itself was once known as Brookside Farm or Brookside Dairies during the Smith and Harris ownership, and we have been able to trace the name to when the Avery family owned parcels of land alongside Robbins Brook, now known as the Patagonia River. It is felt that returning to this name best reflects the true and complete history of the site, and we are still honoring the families that resided in the house by encapsulating all three names in our tagline, as well as acknowledging our agricultural history with the strong verb to cultivate, as we continue to encourage new stories and new histories through research, exhibits, preservation, and programs that are relevant to the public and residents of East Lyme. We have already been informed by Connecticut Humanities that there is further grant money to fund hiring a local firm to create a new logo, new signage, and redecorating the inside of the house to offer changing exhibits that will draw new and returning visitors, and the Friends Board is committed to seeking out funds to continue this progress. In our research, we, to our pleasant surprise, have found that our history as a museum has come full circle. I recently found in the papers of the Smith Harris House founder and longtime commission member who passed away recently, Barbara Odgers, a paper dated October 19th, 1978, where she states, quote, "The Smith Harris Commission will complete their outline of a 5-year plan to return the 1840 farmhouse to a working farm." Now, while we don't have the staff or the resources or the intention to return us completely to a working farm, it is nice to know that in reconnecting to our agricultural history, we are embracing the work, direction, and intent of the original commission. As I learned today at the State Historic Preservation Office Conference, places have names that are important to the history and the heritage of a community. We want to use the name that best allows us to tell our story in the long and fascinating history of East Lyme. We believe the new name, Brookside Farm Museum, with the tagline, "Cultivating the Story, Avery, Smith, and Harris, 1845 to 1955, is the most suited to our historic site, and we ask for your support as we embark on these new endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you. Joni, you're such an asset to our town, and
Thank you.
the work you've done has been amazing. You've been with the Brookside Farm. You've been with Brookside Farm for how long now? How many
Since
years?
2013.
Yeah, and hopefully many more. You've made a difference.
Thank you.
You made a difference. I know your commission fully supports
gonna
you,
say
and it's great to have you people here as well.
I work with wonderful people.
Yeah, you sure do, and committed. You know, unsung heroes. You know, but we have a great museum over there, and I respect the work that you've put in to really determining the future, the vision of where this town asset is going. I really do appreciate it, and I asked the Selectmen to also support bringing this to a town public hearing so that we can make this an ordinance and officially change your name. Other comments this evening?
I just agree with everything you said so far and what we've heard. And, so like the Smith Acres, and I'm sure how many times have all of us even said, meaning to talk about the Samuel Smith house, we said Smith Harris. I mean, it happens a lot. So,
Yes.
and but I love the way, one of the things I have concern with now is we're forgetting history sometimes when we take certain acts and some stuff like that. This doesn't. It returns to what was initially there, while recognizing where the Smith Harris, that connection there. So that was the only concern I had, but you've answered that perfectly. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
I know in that tagline, you were struggling with that tagline for a while, and I liked what you came up with. Putting Avery in that name is very important. Why is that important?
It is. It's important because we're missing a lot of Avery tourism, believe it or not. And I spent a couple years giving tours of the Avery Cop Museum in Groton, which is down the street from the Ebenezer Avery House. And I would talk to people that came from Kansas, that came from Texas, and they were doing what they call the Avery Pilgrimage. And so they would go, and you have to also understand, too, that the Avery Memorial Organization, the big genealogy organization, is rooted in the Ebenezer Avery House. That's their main location, similar to our Thomas Lee, the Lee family with the East Lyme Historical Society. And so I would give tours, and I would tell folks, you need to come down to East Lyme. You've got to see the Smith Harris House. You know, we're the Thomas Avery House, too. And it wasn't on their agenda. They had scheduled their trip already. They knew what their itinerary was, and we couldn't get them down here. So with the tagline being pretty much on everything that we do, whether it's our logo, our website, our social media, we're getting the Avery name and our personal ownership of some of that as our site and the town out there as well. So we have really communicated with our peers in the museum field and in the heritage community, and really talked to people and made very conscious decisions with this. And we didn't want to lose the Avery portion of the site as we continue working with the farm, because that's what they did in the 1840s, and they had a farm. So, so we are indeed continuing what they did as well.
Good, great. Other questions, folks?
Very well spoken.
Yeah, we can have more, and you have to do this again, you know, in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Is that right? You're really good at it.
Oh, well, thank you.
But you knew that.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? So with the public hearing comes an information session first. Usually we kind of put it out there for the public to know what they're talking about.
Okay.
So, you know, a condensed version of the same thing, just this is
Sure.
who we are and why we're doing it. And,
Okay.
just briefly, 30-second version of what you went through. You did a big study. You had focus groups. It wasn't just a name change. It was about the whole operation, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we focus groups not only amongst ourselves and our two boards, our commission and our friends group, but we also did bring in the local town people as well. As far, I mean, in the heritage community, like I said, the Historic Properties Commission, the East Lyme Historical Society, Liz Kukta, our town historian, was there as well. So this was not just something that we kind of came up with and said, hey, somebody has a good idea. I mean, there was
First Selectmen was there for a little bit.
Yeah,
saying,
absolutely,
right?
yes. And, you know, we intend to continue that as well. We do plan to talk again to our peers in the community, a meeting with East Lyme Historical Society, the Historic Properties Commission, and of course the folks at the Friends of Samuel Smith House as well. You know, we really, when we started finding ourselves up against this whole issue over the name, particularly, you know, seeing Smith Acres posted, people were posting it on our Facebook page, I thought, oh my goodness, this is really a disconnect. We instead, you know, we looked at the crisis as an opportunity. You know, what can we do that can, you know, benefit our site and our town at the same time, and not, you know, be negative about it and just grump. It was more of a, hey, you know, how can we make this work for us? We saw several avenues that we could choose.
Thank you, Joni. Go ahead.
Just one question.
Sure.
Point of order, and what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Has the commission passed the name change? So you
Yes.
approved it as a commission?
Both the Friends Board of Directors and the Smith Harris House Commission has formally approved the name change
Thank
and
you.
the tagline as well.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Connell, you want to walk us through the legal part?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you again, Joe.
The Smith Harris House Commission was established by virtue of an ordinance. So we should have an ordinance amending the name of the Smith Harris House Commission. As proof that we all paid close attention to the presentation, I think we want to make a change here. In the draft ordinance, it had the Smith Harris House Commission would be amended to change the name of the commission to the Brookside Farm Commission, but I believe it should be the Brookside Farm Museum Commission.
Sandy already gave me that change.
Good.
So
We're all,
Good.
we're on, so that's the one change we would want to suggest as you go forward.
Thank you.
And it would be the subject of a public hearing, and the more comments could be made at the public hearing.
Good. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your guidance.
I'll read the,
Sure.
call to the public hearing. Town of East Lyme, Board of Selectmen, notice of public hearing regarding a demolition delay ordinance and amendment to ordinance concerning Smith Harris House Commission. Notice is hereby given of a public hearing to be held by the East Lyme Board of Selectmen on June 6, 2018, at the East Lyme Town Hall, 108 Pennsylvania Avenue, Niantic, Connecticut, at 7 p.m. to consider the adoption of the following ordinances. Demolition delay ordinance. 1, pursuant to Connecticut General Statutes, Section 29-406, there shall be a 90-day waiting period before permit to demolish any structure located in the town of East Lyme may be issued. The 90-day waiting period shall commence upon the filing of a demolition permit application with the East Lyme Building Department. 2, the application for a demolition permit must install, the applicant for a demolition permit must install within 7 business days of submitting the application the sign provided by the building department upon submission of a $200 deposit on the front wall of the structure or such other location as directed by the building official. The sign must remain in place until such time that the waiting period has expired. 3, within 7 days of the filing of the application, the building official shall determine if the structure proposed for demolition is included in the East Lyme Historic Property Inventory, as it may be amended from time to time. If the structure is included in the inventory, the building official shall notify the Historic Properties Commission in writing within 7 business days of such determination. If the structure is not included in the inventory, the building official may issue the permit forthwith. 4, upon notification as set forth above, the commission shall review the application at its next scheduled meeting. The commission may waive the balance of the waiting period or may determine that the waiting period must remain in effect. The commission shall provide notice of its decision to the applicant and the building official in writing within 7 business days of said decision. Ordinance amending the ordinance concerning Smith House Commission. 1, the ordinance entitled Ordinance Concerning Smith Harris House Commission is hereby amended to change the name of the commission to the Brookside Farm Museum. 2, in all other aspects, said ordinance shall remain in full force and effect. Interested persons are invited to attend and be heard, dated at East Lyme, Connecticut, on the 16th day of May 2018. I was going to add that in order for support, Maggie Prokop had to pledge internal allegiance to the Boston Red Sox, but I didn't do that, so. Yes?
I think you want to say Brookside Farm Museum Commission.
Okay. Then I'll amend that, or Brookside Farm Museum Commission.
I'll second that. Those
Okay.
motions.
Any discussion? I have a question, because this is far different than when I reviewed it months ago with Barbara. It says, the demolition delay, and it says East Lyme will delay all demolitions for 90 days, period. And then if it's,
Can I get a second on that before discussion?
it was seconded by Mr. Salerno. And then if it's on the list, they get notification, they go to meeting, they take a picture, and then they waive the rest of the 90 days. What happens if they're not on the list?
The ordinance.
The ordinance.
Demolition things. I think it's in.
Yeah, it says it's not on the list.
Number 3, the last sentence.
If the application, if the,
It's not
You,
included.
so you don't,
Assignments
it's on
remain
this one,
in
see,
place.
it says,
Oh.
may issue the permit for, that, you don't have the numbered one in your book, the up-to-date. There it is.
if the structure is not included, the building may, thank you. That was my question. I want to make sure that someone isn't sitting there for 90 days. Good, that's why I had a question. Any other questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? We'll go to public hearing in a couple of weeks. This will be part of our regular meeting. It's actually in 3 weeks. This is one of those months where there's 5 Wednesdays, so we'll actually be, the 6th of June is 3 weeks from now. The discussion, I'm not sure there's any action, but health insurance payment. Yeah, Anna, if you come up and discuss what you've given us. Thank you all. Thank you all for your service to the town. Thank you for all the hard work you do.
Mr. Dixon, we have a handwritten correction on the ordinance. We can sign and then authorize a retyping of this
Okay. Okay.
before it goes.
Mrs. Johnson is here. We've been struggling with our health insurance fund throughout several years now, but this has been a particularly tough year. We tried to gauge, as we're putting the budget together, where our health insurance is going to come in and what the projection is for the next year. And when we do that, there's always a 90-day delay. We're using a 12-month rolling, but the last several months have indicated the next year is going to go up higher than our budgeted and what we were planning on. But you can give us the background on this, if you would.
Yes. So as you may recall, depending on how many years you've been on the board, in years past, when we would get to the end of the year and working on our new proposed budget, in looking at that rolling 12 months, having additional months from the initial time that our renewal was projected for the upcoming fiscal year, our claims would actually go down, so we would be able to lower what we had projected in our budget. Well, it's the complete opposite this time. We're looking at having to increase it. Through fiscal year 6/30/14, we were experiencing, our claims were on like the low, if you think of a bell-shaped curve, our claims in this town were on the low side of that bell shape. However, since that year ended, starting with the 6/30/15 year, our claims have been escalating, going up each year. At that time, we had at 6/30/14, we had 12 large claims, and the way a large claim is gauged, as you know, we've talked about having individual stop loss on any one claim. Once the claim exceeds $125,000, it's picked up by that secondary insurance. So we start looking at a claim as being large once it hits 50% of that, which is $62,500. So back at 6/30/14, we had 12 claims. And starting with 6/30/15, we went up to 19. We now, in this current fiscal year, have 20 large claims. And in looking at that, 1.8% of the participants in our plan make up 27.9% of our total claims. So we've recently sat down with our insurance consultant and looked at where we were when we started with the budget process, what our renewal should be, and we've adjusted that based on the way that our claims have been coming in. I don't know if anybody has any questions on the information that was provided to you.
You're not looking for action tonight, you're just kind of stating fact, and when we get to the end of the year, we're gonna be able to make that final calc, move forward, but we know that the numbers are far greater than they have been, and I'm gonna be putting together a task force to people in the industry. I have a few people who have volunteered already. I'll be looking for some more who would like to review what we have, review the marketplace and see what we can do out there. Of course, we're bound by binding arbitration rules in the state of Connecticut, which do not allow us to move the health insurance benefits for union employees much more than 1% a year in their contributions. It's just the way it is. You ask for much more than that, you go to arbitration, you lose every time. So we're, and they're paying a good, healthy share of that, but.
One thing I might point out, we also we changed from having Anthem as our carrier to Aetna, beginning with the fiscal year 7/1, for the 14-15 fiscal year. And actually, the primary reason for the change was that our administrative fees for the plan decreased. And actually, at this point in time, we're still paying less for our administrative fees than we were back when Anthem was our carrier. We did do another RFP looking at this to go into next year, and it was still determined that Aetna would be the place for us to stay at this point in time.
Any questions for Mrs. Johnson? Terrific. All right, thank you. We'll move on our agenda. Discussion and possible action of the installation of a streetlight on Dodge Court. In some discussions with Dr. Beebe, I think we've kind of tabled that for right now. And she's going to look into lighting her own property, but also, I guess, with the change in the time and the clocks and all that, the light that does typically shine on her property from the water from Dodge Pond is on a little earlier now, or as the dusk hits. Thank you for that field work, Mr. Siri. So that's been withdrawn for now. I also had a little concern that we'd be starting a precedent of paying for streetlights in some dark places, but we just don't have the money for that either, frankly. So, any other comments on that? I know some of you have done your work on that and came prepared. All set? Okay. Ex officio reports. Mr. Am I missing one? Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. We'll accept the resignation. You'll notice Mr. McEllen. McElhaney, David McElhaney resigned from the zoning commission as an alternate. And that has already been replaced by Mr. Dwyer, long-term server of our town. Good to see him back. Now, ex officio reports. Want to start at the West Coast over here, Mr. Daigle?
Sure. On the Harbor Management Shellfish Commission, just want to let the public know that Wellsco is holding a public hearing tomorrow evening at 6:30 p.m. at the Waterford Town Hall to solicit input and comments from the public regarding a potential revision to their aquaculture plan. So people are invited to attend that public hearing as they see fit. On the Inland Wetlands Agency, there's been a new application put in for the 23-lot subdivision at the Green Valley Lakes Road. The existing submission for the 25-lot is still pending, but there's been a new submission for a 23-lot subdivision as well. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you.
Well, most of the things that I might have spoken about have already been mentioned. Wellsco, they're going to have that public hearing tomorrow night in Waterford. Smith Harris, as you know, they're changing the name, and with the historic properties, we're focused on the demolition delay ordinance. So all my thunder has been stolen.
But you're still doing the work. Appreciate
Well, I'm still
it.
trying.
We'll go all the way down to the end, Mr. Salerno.
Yes, at the Planning Commission meeting earlier in the month, just note that the 23-lot subdivision, Green Valley Lakes, that was just referred to, has been withdrawn, I think because they're waiting on inland wetlands. There was a couple of zoning referrals that were passed on. There was also, last week, on the 10th, there was a seminar with Randall Arndt, which was open to zoning commission, planning commission, and the inland wetlands. I wasn't able to attend it, but I did attend when they were here about 10 years ago. And I guess it was pretty well attended. And this was to talk about different ways of zoning and building subdivisions to try to preserve open space, be more flexible, to decouple lot size with densities and such. And that was what was based on all our zoning and planning changes back 10 years ago for conservation by design development. Building commission meets tomorrow. Everything, all the bids are in. The building commission has accepted some alternates, including replacing the windows in Lily B. So not all the windows originally spec'd out, but they do need to be replaced. The generators, the fire alarm systems, those are all in. Now that we're getting closer to the building phase, the building not the retainer, but the
Contingency.
the contingency has been slightly reduced. That was so they passed that. It went on to the Board of Education, which met right after that, and they did approve that. So at the last meeting, they started